In part 4 and the final installment of the CN Toronto bypass, I'm going to talk about the construction of the York Subdivision in Toronto MacMillan Yard. But before that, I want to talk briefly about a correction with regards to the Hamilton Northwestern. And also, I just want to clarify something about the flooding I spoke about in part 3 as well. In part 3, I mentioned that the Hamilton Northwestern crossed over the Queen Elizabeth Highway around here. That is actually not correct. That was always the Grand Trunk and then CN. However, the Hamilton Northwestern, what it did is it came along Ferguson Avenue. Let me just show you here for a sec. There we go. So Ferguson Avenue, ran along Ferguson. You can see a line here. It looks like it may still be there, so it could quite possibly be the old Hamilton Northwestern right-of-way, now an industrial section. So it curves off towards the lake. And then it paralleled Burlington Street, which now part of that is Nikola Tesla, as you can see here. And then it curved, and then it joined the beach strip and ran along the same length of track where the beach strip was. You can see the spur ends right there. So I just want to make that correction from part 3. There was some question in part 3 about where the flooding occurred that I described in the reconstruction of the Halton Sub. It was actually north of Milton. So I'm following the line now on Google Maps. And then right there you can see where the third line jig-jogged over the left. And that's where the CN cut was dug from north of 10th Side Road up part of the escarpment. And to illustrate that further, here's a picture I took. I rail fan there fairly often, milepost 31, showing the cut. And that's where they had to also put the special drainage in to prevent for future flooding. So looking at Google Maps, we'll start here at the west end. That's the line going into Toronto. That was the old line, originally Grand Trunk and CN. The New York sub branches off here at Malton at the Y and heads northeast. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that area. That up there is the Brampton Intermodal Terminal, which was built in 1979. Didn't exist back then. And right there is a reservoir constructed after the 1954 Hurricane Hazel for flood control. You see the line approaches Highway 427, goes underneath it there. And it goes underneath Albion Road, continues east, and it goes underneath Martin Grove and Steeles Avenue, continues northeast. Crosses the Humber River. That was a fairly substantial bridge there. Also crosses the CP line going out west at that point, the Mac Tier sub. The line between Weston Road on the right and Pine Valley / Fenmar on the left. The line goes underneath the 400. And we approach Toronto Yard, which will become Toronto MacMillan Yard. You can see the Y there very clearly. And then right to the right of Toronto Yard is the Newmarket sub. And that was called Snyder, the junction. The line continues, goes underneath Bathurst Street, crosses under Yonge Street, and then also east of Yonge Street is the junction at Doncaster, and that is the junction with the Bala sub of the CN, and that's where the York sub crossed there. Another Y is there. It goes underneath John Street, crosses what today is the 404 over top. Then Woodbine Avenue, curves northeast, then goes underneath Warden Avenue. And it crosses McCowan Road, which was a level crossing. Now it's an overpass. Turns southeast and crosses over 14th Avenue and Markham Road. Then it goes by what is today a golf course in the Rouge River area. There's a bridge over the Rouge River fairly substantial bridge again. Continues southeast. Eventually goes underneath Plug Hat Road. And then that area south of Plug Hat Road is bare, and it crosses underneath the Canadian Pacific. And what would have been the Canadian Northern was abandoned by that time. And the line crosses Altona Road and Whites Road. And crosses over the 401. At that time, it was only a 6-lane highway. It's much more substantial today. And joins up with the Oshawa Sub and the Lakeshore. And that's it for the York Sub. Before we get going with the aerial photographs, I do have one picture taken near where the York Sub branches off from the line going down to Toronto. Here's a picture at Torbram of some engines. At one time, you used to be able to rail fan around here. It was all level crossings. Today, due to all the grade separations, you really can't get in there to get photos. So now looking at the first photo, this is west of Highway 427 in 1963. You can see the line going from left to right horizontally, meeting up with old Highway 27 there. And it curves, starts to dip down sort of southeast. And in the next photo, taken about a year later, 1964, you can see the line going off the top corner of the map there. And you can also see where they're working on that reservoir that you saw on Google Maps, which is under construction. Here's a photo taken just west of the 427 along the York Sub. In the background, you can see the reservoir that I was talking about. And after it crosses what will be Highway 427, it levels off, goes, you can see they're putting in a bridge where it's going to go underneath Albion Road. They got a diversion going on right there. This is taken in 1963. And then the line curves up. There's another shot around Albion. This is 1964 and curving off to the east. And here it is at the top of the map. It's going underneath Steeles Avenue at the top, continuing northeast. One of the more impressive structures was the bridge over the Humber River. Not only did it have to cross the Humber River, but the CN also had to get across the entire valley, which required a very substantial structure. In the pictures here, 1963 and 1964, you can see the development of the bridge and the building of the piers. And I also have a picture from Google Street View from the 407, and you can see what the bridge looks like today. Very impressive indeed. Moving further east, you can see the right-of-way going between the roads at Pine Valley Drive and Weston Road in 1963 and 1964 as they're constructing. And then further east again, the line crossed underneath the Highway 400, which you can clearly see here in 1963 and 1964 again. Now we get to the construction of Toronto Yard, which would eventually become Toronto MacMillan Yard, not too far east of Highway 400. So in the first photo in 1962, you can see the grading's all underway and the yard throat and Y into the yard off the main line. Interestingly enough, to the west, there's no grading done yet, as they worked on the line in pieces, and MacMillan Yard, they got an early start on it due to the immensity of the project itself. Here's a photo in 1963. A lot of the track is now in place, and you can see the line going across the bottom, the York Sub, and the line into the yard to the north. That road to the right is Keele Street. In 1964, you can see a lot of the tracks going in the yard, and they're making really good progress. Just east of Toronto MacMillan Yard, the York Sub would meet the Newmarket Sub. You can see here in this 1962 photo that the grading is done to the Newmarket Sub, and there's a Y to the west side of the Newmarket Sub, and that junction is known as Snyder Junction. And to the further east, you can see no progress has been yet made on the line. Now we move a year later, 1963. The grading's well underway east of the line, and there's tracks in place to the junction meeting up with the Newmarket Sub. 1 year later, 1964, more progress is being made on the line eastbound with the grading and the track as well. Moving further east again, the line crosses Bathurst Street. Shots are in 1963 and 1964. And then underneath Yonge Street, again 1963 and 1964. Moving east of Yonge, the line curves a little bit to the north. You can see some grading done on the left side of the picture. And then there's the Don River there, which which was a fairly substantial valley. And then you can see where the line's been drawn in, where it's going to meet with the ballast sub on the right. This is a 1962 photo. The following year, 1963, you can see they've done a lot of work on the fill through the Don Valley. And there's going to be a bridge there over the branch of the Don itself. And then you can also see they're working on the junction at Doncaster. In 1964, you can see that some tracks in place. I believe that the bridge may be partially built or built there as well. Now focusing on the Doncaster Junction, where the York sub was to meet the ballast sub. You can see the grading taking place there. And then from the previous picture and this picture, you can see where they're working on that bridge over the Don River. And then further to the east, you can see they haven't quite started doing the grading yet in this 1963 photo. And in 1964, you can see that the track's actually in place here at the junction, at Doncaster Junction. And you can also see that a lot of the grading is now being done further east. And you can see that road that curves down and goes over the track is John Street. Here's a couple of photos I took a number of years ago at Doncaster Junction. The first photo is an eastbound CN freight coming along the York sub, and it's about to transfer onto the ballast sub onto the Y. You can see the fill there coming across from the Don River area. And the other photo is a westbound freight hauled by an M420, actually running Longhead Ford, which is a little unusual, and he's heading westbound towards MacMillan Yard, I would assume, after doing some switching. Heading further east, the line goes pretty much directly east, with a couple bridges here and there, and the one bridge towards the right that's going underneath, that's Woodbine Avenue. And the next photo, those photos are both in 1964, by the way. You can see the line, after going east, it curves northeast before crossing Warden Avenue. And at this point it goes, I believe, I don't know if the overpass is in place back there or not, but today Warden does go over top of the tracks. Here's a picture I took a number of years ago of a westbound freight just about to cross 14th Side Road, which isn't in place then, just come underneath Warden Avenue. And I took that from where George's Trains is today. It used to be Railview Hobbies. And just across the street, if I were to turn left, is where Rapido Trains is located. Moving further east, the railway line crossed McCowan Avenue on a level crossing this time. Now it goes over top of McCowan Avenue. Interestingly enough, the double track York sub at this point became a single track line all the way to Pickering with passing tracks. Moving further east again is where the line going east, and then it starts to dip down southeast. And at this point, it goes over top of what it is going to be 14th Avenue there, and then Markham Road. And right at that spot, here's a picture I took of a freight train. These are engines actually heading to the Goderich Exeter Railway on a CN freight train heading westbound. And the bridge you see there is just going over 14th Avenue. If you were to turn the right, you would see that the tracks then also cross over Markham Road. Although I don't have a good aerial photograph of this spot, here's a shot from Google Maps showing the bridge. This would be east of Markham Road and around 9th Line in Markham. And there's a golf course there now. You can see it's a pretty substantial bridge. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a picture from the ground of it, but it's another fairly substantial structure on this part of the York sub. Heading a fair bit east from there, you can see the tracks are definitely heading in a southeasterly direction, on its way towards the Lakeshore line or the Oshawa sub. And that road that's going underneath there is Plughat Road. And then in the picture of the freight train you see there, that's a freight train traveling westbound and just going underneath Plughat Road. Continuing past Plughat Road, the line goes through a cut going southeast, and it goes underneath this Canadian Pacific line heading to Montreal. And also right there is the right-of-way of the Canadian Northern. You really can't make it out, but it basically was going parallel to the CP at that point, and CN had long abandoned it by that point. And then the accompanying photo, it's the same freight train as earlier. In an earlier shot, it's just crossing underneath the CP line, and that is the location of Bear on the CN York Subdivision. East of Bear, the line continues heading southeast, and on this aerial photo, you can just barely see it in the bottom left-hand corner there, curving, and it's crossing Altona and then White's Road. And then continuing east, and you can see it coming from the left, running almost directly east, parallel to a road, goes over a bridge, and it curves slightly over top of Dundas, or also known as Highway 2. and then over top of the 401 there. At that time, the 401 was only 6 lanes, believe it or not. And then curve down a grade, and then joins up with the Oshawa Sub and the Lakeshore trains heading to Montreal. To illustrate the changes in the 401 over the years, here's a great shot in 1979 from a CN freight going over the 401. Back then, as you can see, it was 6 lanes. And then you can see in this later photo from Google Maps that the bridge has been massively expanded in order to cross the massively expanded 401, which I believe it's 12 or 16 lanes now or some crazy thing. With the York Sub ending at Pickering, our journey exploring the CN Toronto Bypass project also comes to an end. Very few people are even aware of this massive project that took place in the early 60s and likely take for granted the GO commuter services in the GTA. The bulk of CN freight trains are now diverted around the city of Toronto, which gave the commuter service the opportunity to grow into what it is today. I hope you enjoyed this series half as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Thank you for watching an episode on railway history. If you have any aspects of railway history that you're curious about, feel free to reach out to me with your suggestions or questions. Also, if you like this video and are interested in seeing more historical content, please subscribe to my channel.